Welcome to the Learnfast Css course, part 1. Please like and subscribe to our channel, Bain's Infotech World, so that we can bring you more educational content in the information technology area. This course will be an introduction to and revision of CSS concepts and syntax. In this course we're going to be covering the contents, table of contents as follows: CSS features, looking at various CSS styling sheet features. We'll also be covering number 2, CSS styling syntax, how to use styling syntax in CSS, and then in section 3 we'll be covering the top CSS styling selectors. Okay, let's go to number 1, section 1. Okay, CSS features. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. This means that you can have multiple styling style sheets which can be overlapping, and what happens is the browser will decide on the priority of each style sheet, and it will decide which styling rules to apply when the web page is loaded with all the style sheets. Usually the one styling rule that's closest to the object being affected is used. So we have cascading style sheets, section 1.1, cascading style sheets which apply styles and formatting to your web page without touching the HTML code, so that you can change the look and feel of your web page just with CSS and not don't have to change any HTML at all, which is very powerful. Section 1.2, CSS works by changing the DOM. The DOM is the document object model. This is a model of the web page which is created by the browser when the web page is loaded. For the browser to be able to format and display the HTML in a web page, it needs to have a model or a map of all of the HTML elements and where they are and where they're located and what they contain. So the document object model is a model of the web page HTML, CSS and JavaScript features contained in the browser's memory. The DOM is a set of definitions in the web browser's memory that describes the web page that has just been loaded. CSS changes attributes of the DOM so that the browser's presentation of it is changed also. The CSS can impact and make changes to the DOM, and thereby it can change and manipulate HTML elements which are being displayed on your web page. The CSS code is a block of code which is contained within style tags, and style tags are contained within the HTML code or the HTML file, or they can be contained in a separate file. Okay, section 1.3, CSS links. To insert a CSS code into the head element of a HTML page, we can use CSS code that can be applied to HTML by inserting it into the head open and head close tags of the web page using the style tags. Anything that's contained between the style tags is interpreted as CSS code. So for example, we have this example here, and we have a look. We have the HTML document, opening text, HTML tag, we have the head tag, and then within that we have the style tag, which says what follows is a CSS code. And then we have the closing style tag, and then we have the rest of the HTML. So these two elements, so this is defining the H2, which is the header to title in HTML, and it's applying the color green to the text. It's giving you a font size of 1 EM and a font family of Courier. So these rules will be applied to any text that's contained within a H2 element in the HTML document. Okay, next section. Okay, CSS links. We can insert a link to an external file in our HTML document. CSS code can be linked to an external file. And how we do this is by using the link tag in our HTML document. So we say link, relationship is a style sheet, so it's saying insert the link, the relationship is that it's a style sheet, and the type of contents of this style sheet are going to be text CSS, and the style sheet is located, the hyperlink reference is located in mystyle.css. So that will look for mystyle.css in the same folder as your HTML document, and it will load up the style definitions. So we have a CSS file outside of the HTML file, and then we have the HTML file loaded within the browser, and when the HTML browser loads the HTML file, when it sees the link tag, it will go and find the CSS file and load that as well. Next section, we have CSS linking. So if we want to link to an external file, another way we can do it is using the import tag. CSS code can be imported into your HTML file as follows. And what we have is an HTML document. We have the style tag followed by an import tag, and then the URL is the name of the file that we're importing, and then we've got test1.css is the name of the CSS file, and we've got a closing tag. So anything that's contained within the test1.css file will be copied into our HTML file and loaded by the browser and processed. So here we have our HTML code, which is this section, and we're importing the test1.css, and in this section we've got our CSS code. Here we define H2 tag has the color green, in font size 1 EM, font family Courier in our CSS file. And as we can see in our browser output up here, what we get is please like and subscribe in green, as we've specified in our CSS file. Okay, going on to the next section. In CSS we can also link to our CSS files. Okay, in this section we can embed our style sheet code into our HTML document in the body section as well, and we can insert our CSS styling code into as an attribute of the element that we'd like to change. So if we have our HTML document here, and then down in the body section we have a h2 tag, which is a heading 2 text tag. What we do is we put in an attribute called style, and within that attribute we can put in our CSS code, and then in h2 we have our text, and then we have our closing h2 tag. So this is embedding our style sheet code within the element itself. And when we have a look at the browser output, we can see that the color red formatting is applied to our HTML text, which is displayed in red in the browser output. So yes, that's quite simple. Okay, moving on to section 2, CSS styling syntax. We can use to select select something in our HTML document. We can use the ID tag, styling using IDs. So referencing the ID attribute in a HTML document, referencing the ID attribute in a HTML document, and inserting your CSS, we can add style to it. For example, we can use in HTML, we can have a div tag, and in there we have an ID attribute which we specify, we give it a name, for example toolbar, and then in our CSS code we use the hash symbol, which means select an ID, and then followed by the name of the ID, which is in this case is toolbar, and then we can apply some formatting rules to that ID. So what will happen in our HTML document is that when we've specified an ID in our HTML, then we go to our CSS section here, and then we select that ID. We're using hash ID name tool text, and we can apply formatting to it, color green, font size 3, font family Courier. So what will happen is these formatting will be applied to the H2 section, which is please like and subscribe. So looking on our browser output, we've got the text which is please like and subscribe as we've formatted it here. Okay, moving on to the next section, 2.2, styling using classes, which is a period. So we can reference our classes using the class attribute in HTML, and we can add CSS code to it. So referencing the class attribute in HTML, we're adding your CSS code in a CSS file. So we have our HTML document. Here we have h2 again, and this time we create a class attribute and we give it the name of the class. And this is the text that's going to be applied, receive that formatting, styling from the styling sheet. And if we go to our style, our CSS file, we have a period which is used to select a class, and then we have the name of the class, and then we have the formatting rules applied to that class. So that's similar to the ID tag. Moving on to the next section. Section 2.3, styling using semicolons. Okay, semicolons are used for formatting our styling code. Always be sure to put semicolons at the end of each styling statement to avoid style sheet errors. For example, in CSS we have dot toolbar, which is your selector, and then our styling rules, font courier, and then followed by a semicolon as to separate the next styling rule, which is color green, and then followed by another semicolon to say that's the end of that styling rule. And then we have our opening and closing brackets which contain our styling code. So we're having a look at our CSS code here, and we can see that we've got our selector, we've got our styling rules, we've got semicolon, styling rule, semicolon, styling rule, and then open and close brackets. Okay, moving on to section 2.4, styling using CSS rules. The CSS statement line always starts with a selector, followed by curly brackets containing the styling definitions or rules that we want to apply. For example, in CSS we can have h1 as our heading 1 tag, open brackets, close brackets, and in between we have our styling rules. This is shown diagrammatically. We have our CSS selector followed by an open bracket followed by CSS definition. So each CSS definition has a semicolon, and we can then add another CSS definition loop around in that way as required. And then once we've finished our CSS styling rules, we can put a closing bracket at the end. Okay, next section. Styling using CSS formatting. The CSS statements, when written in the CSS file, should be written in a format that makes it for easy reading and maintenance, where each definition is written on a separate line. So for readability, for ease of reading and ease of reading other people's code and ease of reading your own code, and also when you're maintaining other people's CSS code, it's much easier to read the code and much clearer if you contain each rule on a separate line. So we start off with the first selector, toolbar, then we have color green, which says that's our first rule, followed by semicolon. On the next line we put our next rule, font size 3em, followed by semicolon. On the next line we put font style courier, followed by semicolon, and then at the end we have our closing brackets. So this becomes a block of code, and it's very easy to see where this block of CSS code starts, begins and ends, and what it contains. So it's very good for readability. Okay, next section, styling using the same elements again in CSS. You can style the same element multiple times and apply different rules to it in your CSS document. And what will happen is when the browser processes the CSS definitions from your CSS file and from within your HTML, it will merge all of the different rules into its memory and apply all the rules to the elements concerned. For example, you may have a H2 with a CSS code saying color green, then we may have another line saying H2 is font size 1em, and then another line saying H2 is font family Courier. So once this is processed, all of these rules will be combined and applied to the H2 tag. And you may also have other styling rules and definitions at the attribute level or the block level in your CSS document, and they will be merged as well as external files. Okay, next section. In your CSS document, you can put comments. Now, you may put comments into your CSS file for information or for documentation purposes to describe who's written the document and what the document contains and what where different parts of the CSS section code are used for, and the purpose and the meaning of each block or section. So you can use that to structure your CSS document for readability by using comments. Okay, next section. The Css Styling Hierarchy. Because many types of CSS styles are applied to a web page, for example, you have your external CSS file, then you may have an imported CSS file, and then you may have a block of CSS code in the header, you may have a block of code in the style tag in the header and in the body, and then finally you may have CSS code in your attribute at the element attribute level with the style tag. So there's lots of styling definitions which are applied. The styling definitions form a hierarchy. At the bottom we have if you loaded some HTML and what the browser has system, when the browser processes this HTML file, it will have its own defaults, system defaults. So those will be applied to the HTML document when it's displayed. Next level up we have the browser default, web browser user default. So the user can go into the browser settings and define his own default values for styling for the HTML document. Then next level up we have the external style sheets which are linked to from within the HTML document, and the imported style sheet documents as well. And then the next level is we can have internal style sheets where we have blocks of style sheet code in the header or the footer, and then finally we have inline style sheets where we have the style statement in the element attributes. Okay, now next section, CSS top styling selectors. Now selectors are basically ways of or methods of selecting an element within your CSS code, and different conventions are used for that. If you want to select a basic element like a anchor or a paragraph, for example, an anchor or a paragraph HTML or a heading 1 in HTML, you can use the A, P and H1 tags. And so in your CSS code, you'll have the HTML tag and followed by brackets containing your styling rules. So you'll have P followed by styling rules and H1 followed by styling rules. So that's what we're doing here is we're selecting at the element level. We're describing the element H1, P, A, and saying select that element, all elements, anchor elements, all paragraph elements, or all heading 1 elements, and apply these rules to those. So a selector selects the type of object you want to transform, and once selected you can apply styling definitions and rules to that object to change its properties and resulting appearance in the web browser window. Selectors can be combined, so for example, instead of having three lines of code in your CSS document, we can, if it's the same, if we decide that they all have the same definition, we can just put A, P, H1 and followed by the rule. So we can put A, P, H1 in our CSS, and then like so, and then have our styling rule in brackets, curly brackets afterwards. We can select HTML elements in a hierarchy as well. For example, if one HTML element is nested inside another HTML element, or a parent element contains a child element, then we can specify that hierarchy and we can select them. So selectors in a hierarchy can be selected. So if we have a div1 which contains a h1 element, we can say select a div that contains h1, and that is done by this. So we put div1 first in our CSS code, and then we put the next element, and then followed by the rule that we want to apply. CSS selectors are case insensitive, so you can have uppercase or mixed case CSS selectors in your CSS style sheet. Moving on to the next section, we have the universal selector. The section 3.2, the universal selector is a star or asterisk, and that means when that is used as a selector in your CSS sheet, it will select everything or anything that matches. So a selector that selects everything is asterisk. For example, we can put star selects everything. For example, in our CSS code, we can say that star space followed by curly brackets color green. So this will mean that the color green attribute will be applied to everything, all HTML elements in your HTML document. So star means applied everything. So we can do nested star. So if we want to apply a rule to everything contained within within a parent HTML element, we can do so. So we can say div space star. So first of all, select the div and then select anything that's inside the div, everything below the div. So we say div space star followed by the color rule definition. and this will turn anything and everything that's contained HTML element which is contained inside a div section will be turned into color green. Okay, moving on to the next section, attribute selectors. Now, a HTML element may have an attribute like href. For example, an anchor or a link has a href, which is a hyperlink reference. So we can select all the HTML elements containing the href attribute, and this is done using attribute selectors, which are square brackets. Attribute selectors match against the element attributes using match expressions. Like so for example, if we just want to match an attribute like href, then we can put it in square brackets, put in the attribute name in square brackets. So if we want to match the style attribute, we can say P for paragraph, square brackets, any paragraph that contains a styling style attribute. We can also say could also give it a value. For example, we can say we can say that we can specify a value that the style attribute must be equivalent to. So we can say any href hyperlink reference attribute that contains is equal to ES, and it will match those. We can also match the we can specify a list of values that the href that the attribute must contain. We can also specify that the attribute starts with some piece of text. We can also specify that the attribute value contains the prefix. We can also specify that the attribute value contains a suffix. We can also specify an attribute value contains a substring. Okay, next section, class selector dot. So if we want to select a dot class, we can use the period. HTML elements are selected by their corresponding class attribute. The class selector character is a period. For example, we have a period here, selector. Selects elements that have the matching class attribute. So period top text is followed by the class selected here is called top text, and then we change it into the color green. So this one matches any HTML elements having the attribute class top text. We can also specify a hierarchy of classes or multiple classes. So we can have, say, select elements that have classes defined. So for example, we can say anything that has a class defined of top text and a class defined of bottom text. So I can use multiple classes to select elements. The ID selector, as mentioned before, is a hash symbol, and it selects the HTML element according to the ID value. So we have hash, which selects elements that have the matching ID attribute. For example, we have the CSS example here. We have hash followed by top text. So we have the raw color green applies to it. It matches the HTML elements having attribute ID equals top text. Okay, descendant selector combinations. We can select elements by defining the descendants. HTML elements are selected by the corresponding descending hierarchy. For example, a span may contain a paragraph having H1 elements within it. So we specify a hierarchy of selectors. So we say span followed by paragraph followed by H1. So select span elements that have P elements that have H1 elements. And the CSS code is like this. So we have span space P space H1, turn them into color green. So all the H1s that are within P paragraphs, which are within spans, will be turned into green. So match is span elements containing P elements containing H elements. We can also specify the ID as well. So we can say span and ID of top text. So select the span elements that have span elements having elements below inside them containing the ID top text. So span top text is the hierarchy. Span contains element with ID of top text and changes it into the color green. So this rule matches the span elements containing elements with the ID top text element with top text. Okay, next section, child selector combinations. In HTML, direct child elements are selected by the corresponding descendant hierarchy using the greater than character. For example, a span element may contain a direct child paragraph within it. So this is allowing you to fine-tune your selecting process by saying that the child must be directly below the first element that you selected. So if you're choosing two nested elements, a nested element, then you can specify that the nested element must be the direct child of the element that you've selected. The way we do this is we say span space greater than sign space P. So span contains paragraph, and the paragraph is the first direct child of it. So select span elements that have a direct child P elements within them. For example, span P, we do greater than, color green. So it's saying select all paragraphs which are children of spans direct children of spans and turn them into color green. So this will match span elements containing direct child element P elements and apply the rule to them. Okay, sibling adjacent selector is a plus sign, and this allows you to select siblings. So if you have a parent HTML element containing a number of children, you can select all of the children under that parent element and have the same siblings. So span plus span. So this means select the second span element that have the same direct parent. So span plus span will select the first level span element, and it will select the second span element as specified by the rule. Sibling general selector is a plus sign. Or an approximate equal sign. The plus sign is used for sibling adjacent selectors or sibling general selector to select any sibling. It doesn't have to be adjacent. We use the approximate sign, which is this one, and then we say any HTML sibling. This is the rule. Rule is for HTML sibling general selection. The sibling general selector selects the following elements having the same parent using the character approximate sign. For example, a paragraph may contain 3 spans directly below it. Only the second, third general spans are selected. This is because the first span can be selected directly by the direct span rule, and if we want to select the second and third, the second span can be selected using the adjacent sibling selector, and if we want to select the second, third and fourth siblings, we can use the general sibling selector. So span colon approximate sign and followed by span. So it selects the second and third sibling span elements having the same direct span parent. Span approximate sign span rule color greens matches 2 and second and third span elements. Next section, specificity of selectors. This is a rule which this is a way of determining which CSS rule should be applied to a particular element. Because you may have multiple rules in different files in different places, when the browser loads all of the rules into its memory, it gives each rule definition a value, and the one with the highest value is the one that's applied to the element. All of the other rules of lower value are ignored. So we can specify an element may have, so this is called the specificity of selectors. An element may be selected by many rules. The specificity principle decides which rule takes precedence over others. The specificity principle states that the rule closest to the element takes the highest precedence. So this means that, for example, if you have a style element attribute, then that is most likely going to be the style definition that's closest to the element because it's inside the element, and that would take priority over style definitions contained in other places in style blocks or in external CSS files. Each rule contributes a token value, specificity value. All the specificity values are added up to decide which rule has the top specificity value, and then that rule is applied. For example, using ID in an element, ID equals name, then that value is 100, and this value is very high because the ID can be only used once on a web page and only applies to one element, so there's no room for confusion there. So 100 ID is 100, and the value is high because only one element will match the ID, and that one will have the highest value. So the fewest matches give the highest value because it is the most specific selection possible. Okay, classes can be applied to elements. They can be applied to multiple elements. So a class definition will be can be applicable to lots of different elements. So the value of that is 20, and the value priority of that is medium because many elements can match the class attribute. The element attribute again is very general. You can have lots of elements, paragraph elements, anchor elements, and H1 elements within a HTML document, and you have lots of occurrences of them. So the lowest priority is 001, which is applied to an element level. So in your CSS file, if you say H1 brackets color green, that is the lowest priority because in your HTML document you're going to have lots and lots of H1 elements, possibly. So the value is low at the element level, and many elements can match the element type. Yeah, so that was the last section in this video on CSS rules. So we just recap what we've covered in this video, and yeah, that'll be it. So in summary, in this video we've covered CSS features, which including cascading style sheets. CSS works by changing the DOM, document object model, definition held in memory by the web browser. CSS, we can put CSS code into our HTML file by including it in our head element. In HTML, we can also put a link in our HTML file to link to an external CSS file. We can also import external CSS code files into our HTML file. We can also embed style sheets into our elements using the style tag. So the general rule for CSS styling syntax is this: you can select by ID, so ID equals something. You can select by class, so you can say class equals something in the element attribute. When writing your CSS code, always use semicolons to finish at the end of each styling rule. when using CSS formatting, always use put each styling rule on a separate line, and so that it's easier to see the styling block and easier to read and simpler for writing as well. And also for maintenance, you can just delete, if you want to delete a rule, you can just delete a line and it won't affect any of your other CSS rules. But if you deleted a line, otherwise you may have 3 CSS rules on the same line. If you delete the one line, it will delete all of your CSS. It will delete your all 3 CSS rules instead of just the one that you wanted to delete. Also, you can use the same elements, style the same elements over again and again in the CSS file. What the web browser will do is it will merge all of the CSS rules and combine them in memory when it renders the web page. You can use in CSS, you can use comments for putting information and for documentation and maintenance, and for information, so that it's easier to read the code, and other people that might be reading the code or maintaining your CSS code can see why the code is structured in that way. The Css Styling Hierarchy starts from a number of defaults. The web browser has a system default, so when it loads HTML file, it will have its own defaults for loading the HTML file and displaying it, which is very basic. Then the user can go into the web browser and define his own or their own user-defined styling defaults. Then you can have an external file which can be linked to or imported into your HTML file. You can have a block of CSS code in your HTML file in the heading or the body section, and finally you can have some CSS styling code in a style tag within your element as a style attribute. In section 3 we covered the top styling selectors. So the top styling selectors are the element selector. You can select an element like anchor, paragraph, h1 tag. You can select everything using the star tag. You can select attributes using square brackets, so you can select all elements with the href tag, href attribute. You can select classes using the period. You can select IDs using the hash. You can select hierarchy. You can select elements within a hierarchy using the descendant selector combination. You can select siblings in a hierarchy using the child selector combinations and using the sibling adjacent selector. You can also use the general sibling selector. And finally, we covered in this video, we covered the specificity of selectors, which determines which selector is applied, takes priority over all the other select rule definition. So an element may have lots of rules applied in different places within the HTML document and in lots of different CSS files in your project or on your website. And what the browser does is, as it's loading all of these definitions, it gives each definition a value, numeric value, and the numeric value with the rule definition, CSS rule definition with the highest value is the one that is eventually applied to your element. For example, a style definition attribute in your element will be of the highest priority because it is the one that is closest to the element. If that element is also styled in an external CSS file, then that will be a much lower priority. So the closer the style link rule is to the element, the more impact it has. You may analyze your style sheet rules and within your browser. So for example, if you've loaded your browser and then you've got lots of for example, if you load your browser like so, what we can do is we can use the web developer tools built into your browser to look at the CSS code, so you can be developing a web page and see it in your browser, and it's not appearing in your browser as you think it should be. So you need to look at which CSS rules are being applied and which ones are being ignored in your web browser and why. And what you can do is you can look at your web development tools. Control-Shift-I will bring up your web developer console as we have here, and we can see different parts of our web page. So in the left hand side here we've got our HTML, and we've got the different sections, div, script tags, and we can select an element, for example, select this one here. So if we select, let's select the search box, or even the home tag, the home button. Let's select that. So that takes us to our HTML document, which is this one, and we've got, it says paper item class. This gives it multiple classes and different states. So then that's selecting our home button, and this is our HTML code. So next to this was our CSS code, and this is the CSS code that we've got down here. So we can see that select a different one. If we select this one, picture element here, which is a logo. So if we go down, if we select this one again, and we say, selecting our logo, YouTube logo at the top, and if we look in our HTML, we can see that it's contained within a div section, and it's given an ID of logo icon, and it's got different various container classes. And what we can do is we can look in this section here, this box, and we can see that all of the styling rules that have been applied to that logo. We can see it's an element, it's in line, and we've got the width is 80 pixels, the height is 24 pixels, and it's saying that this rule here, MS flex none, which means it's a rule for a Microsoft browser, WebKit flex, which is a rule for another web browser. They have a line through, which means that these rules have been ignored. If you click on the little exclamation mark here, it tells you, give you some information of why that rule was ignored. On this one, we can say filter, okay, and then we have a flex one. We have the flex rule down here at the bottom as well, which is our CSS rule. So we've got hash, which is the ID selector, and it selects the ID with the name logo icon container, and followed by classes, and this is the width and the height of that element, the YouTube logo element. And then we also have, further down, we have more elements and definitions and margin variations, margin left, bottom, right, padding variations, and we also have rules which have been crossed out. And we also have information about why certain rules are not applied. For instance, this one, MS flags align, it says it's an invalid property because MS means it's referring to a Microsoft browser, and here at the moment this browser is Firefox that we're using. So this gives you, the web developer console gives you lots of information about debugging your CSS code and figuring out what's going wrong if you have lots of CSS definitions. Also in your console you have lots of system messages indicate referring to errors about loading your web page and so on. And we have a debugger which allows you to look at various included files like CSS or script, JavaScript or CSS files included in from your website. So this one here, for example, S-Player is the video player used in YouTube, and it's saying it's using a JavaScript JS base, and these are all different JavaScript elements. So we're going to our style editor. We can have a look at this. So what we can do is we can edit styles here. This gives you, style editor actually gives you all of the style sheets that your web page is using, and so yeah, this gives you lots of information: font family, Roboto, font style italic, font weight 300, and source where everything is coming from. So it's very useful information. Okay, well that was the web developer console. Thanks very much for watching this video, and please subscribe to our channel, Bain's Infotech World, on YouTube, and have a nice day. Thanks very much.